we start getting so scared of foods that it feels like there's no safe options out there anymore. There's many people with autoimmune diseases who really cut down their diet so much that they have 5 to 10 foods that still feel safe, that they kind of eat every day. And they're too scared to venture outside of that and try new foods again.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Xenia Branstetter, a former financier in the City of London, who faced multiple autoimmune diseases that left her bedridden and unable to keep up with her job and life. After making the difficult decision to quit her job and focus solely on her recovery, Xenia went to extreme measures, becoming obsessed with healthy living and facing struggles with depression and disordered eating along the way. I was curious to learn more about Xenia's autoimmune conditions, the mistakes she made on her journey, the lessons she learned, and what motivated her to become a coach helping others going through similar challenges. We dive into topics such as the importance of self-care, the role of mindset in healing, and the power of community in support and growth. Xenia's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the ability to overcome even the most difficult challenges. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and enjoy us for this enlightening and inspiring conversation with Xenia Branstetter. Xenia Branstetter, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you here. So, Xenia, to kick things off, could you share with the audience your story, your time working in finance, and why and how you switched to becoming a health coach?
Yeah, it's a really long story. I'm going to try and cut it a bit short.
That's fine. That's okay.
So, yeah, I always say my previous life because it really feels like a very different life to what I'm currently leading. I used to, so I studied finance out of school. I then moved to the UK to work in London for a couple of years. In that industry, and it was at the time it was my dream job. I was super excited that I was there. I felt like everything was going according to plan, how I had always pictured my life kind of plan out. And then it was very surprising to me when suddenly it felt like that wasn't really the life that I wanted anymore. So it felt like it was hard to get out of bed in the morning. Suddenly, I felt like I had no energy. I was not in a good mood for a really long time. It was just a couple of things like that that made me question what was going on. What was wrong really, because it didn't make any sense to me, given how excited I had been to move there, to start that job, to be in that world. And it just felt like my health was like slowly declining, and I had no real reason for it. I had no explanation. Eventually it got so bad that I went to the emergency room because I just felt terrible. I had no I couldn't even describe my symptoms really well because it wasn't anything very specific. It just felt like I couldn't get through the day anymore. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Everything was painful. Everything was just overwhelming, really. So they did a lot of tests, ran a lot of analyses, found out that a lot of my blood markers were all over the place. Everything was kind of a mess, really, which was completely surprising to me because I'd always been a healthy person up until then. So I'd never had to deal with major health issues. But yeah, from there it kind of kickstarted. I had one autoimmune disease, then I had 2 autoimmune diseases, I had 3 autoimmune diseases. So I kept accumulating them seemingly out of nowhere. And from there on, really everything kind of changed. And I ended up quitting my job eventually because I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was too much pressure. It was too stressful. I couldn't sleep anymore, but whenever I was awake, I was too exhausted to really work and to keep up with that life. So I decided to quit, take a year to just focus on my health and do whatever I can to feel better again. And that year kind of turned into 2 years, and it felt less and less like I could ever go back to that life. And eventually I did a certification as a health coach, really just for myself at the time, because I thought it would be interesting to learn more about the psychology really of healing, the psychology of like dealing with big changes like this, big life changes like this, learning about the health element of it, really the different things you can do to heal, to recover from a chronic condition like that. And eventually I decided that that was really where my passions are lying, where I could really do what felt best to me at the time, feels best to me right now, work with people who are in a similar situation as me and who could kind of benefit from what I learned. Because throughout that whole journey, I made so many mistakes. And I think my healing journey was so much more difficult than it really had to be at the time. But because I put in everything I had, all the time that I had, eventually, I learned so much, and I was able to really kind of apply that in a way that felt good to me, and that eventually also got me results, because it took really years until I could see some improvements. Now I live completely symptom-free, which still feels wild to me sometimes because it has been so difficult and it has been such a struggle. But yeah, I think by making all of these mistakes, I learned a lot of things that other people could benefit from. And if there's only one person I can help avoid the mistakes that I made, I feel like I've already kind of completed my goal, and that's what I'm here to do.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great story, and it's interesting how many people, work in health, or at least in holistic or natural health, that have kind of gone through the same or a similar journey. I used to work in central London. I used to work in IT. It was a very stress-free job. It was a very well-paid job. The hours weren't very long at all. In fact, they were quite short compared to most people. Plenty of paid holiday. And at one point, it was my dream job, and it was amazing while it was still my dream job. But then after a while, I fell out of love with it, and it did change a little bit as well. And I didn't get on with my boss at the time, but I just kept waking up every day thinking there's got to be more to life than this. And I think for a lot of us, it's you want to wake up and you want to make a change in the world. You want to make a difference. You want to help people, right? And I think that we all go through a very similar journey to get to that point. So, you actually went through, a time of becoming quite ill to be able to find what your purpose in life was.
Yeah.
Whereas my story, I didn't actually have like a serious illness per se, but I just had that deep feeling of there's more to life than this, and that led me on a very long journey. So, what years were you living in London?
I think it must have been 2016 to around the time where COVID hit, really. So I think it was 21 when I left, so about 5 years.
Okay. Yes, I mean, that's interesting. So I guess you're working in the city of London, were you?
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of in the kind of Liverpool Street kind of area.
Yeah, the bank area.
Yeah. I mean, I actually worked in a facility right in the heart of that area up until, I'm trying to think what year it would have been, about 2010, I think. I moved to more sort of the West End of London, which is a bit more the medical kind of centre. But, I had a lot of experience when I was working right in that kind of financial centre of what it's like to live in that environment. And even after that as well, actually, I was still seeing clients that worked in that environment. And, whilst it generally pays extremely well, what I tend to see is people that, they're eating on the go, they're working very long hours, they're going to bed late, there's lots of stress, and it's almost like they're chasing something, but they don't know what it is. They might have the big house, they have the big car, they've got the family, but they never see the family. They might have a holiday once a year, and then they're on holiday, but they're on the phone for the whole holiday, right? So, I'm very familiar with that kind of existence. And, a lot of these people at some point, normally, I would say, my experience quite often, once they hit their 40s, is when they kind of hit a brick wall and think, whoa, hang on, something isn't right here. The old saying is, people spend their whole adult life climbing the corporate ladder to find that when they get to the top, it's up against the wrong wall.
Yeah.
Right. So, I've had a lot of that. And also medical doctors as well are kind of similar, in a very similar environment. They eat poorly, they work really long hours, it's really stressful. The ones that I've worked with are generally quite well paid as well. And then what's quite interesting is they'll be working with me for a year or two, and then they kind of realize, what am I actually doing with my life? I had one client who was a surgeon, and she used to work, she used to do cancer surgeries on women. So it's like gynecological cancers. And after working with me for a few years, she said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, what do you mean? She said, my job. And she was like the top of the top surgeons in London. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, these ladies come in, they're nearly always obese. And she said, I cut them open, I cut something out, I stitch them back up and say, off you go. She said, I'm not really making any real difference to their life, because they're not going to change their diet, they're not going to change their lifestyle. They're just going to come back another time. And so she quit, and she, what did she study? She studied cranio-osteopathy, because she wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And she didn't feel that as a very highly paid surgeon that she was really making a difference. So it's really interesting, isn't it? How, we go on this journey, and whilst it's painful at some point, you went through 2 autoimmune conditions, which I'm sure wasn't pleasant, but it brings you to your path, so to speak. It brings you to your mission, but you have to go through that period of time to actually get there.
Yeah, sadly, I think you're right. And I'm now looking back, I'm really glad that it happened to me that early, because at the time I think I was in my mid-20s, and I'm really grateful that it didn't happen when I was 40 years old or older, because now I feel like I really do have, at any age, you have a chance to do it differently, to start new. But I think I feel relieved that I had the chance to do that early, and really question what I was looking for in life, right? What I was searching for what my passions were, where my values lie, if it's possible to do something with my life that's more aligned with these core attributes. And that's something really that you don't just find out about yourself if you don't put in the effort. And sometimes you're forced to put in that effort, right? If you go through a health struggle like that, for example, any kind of dramatic diagnosis, anything traumatic that happens to you, that really forces you to do that. But usually our lives aren't really designed to accommodate for these types of self-exploration. It's not something that we go through at school, that we go through in university. Nobody asks these questions ever. And from that point of view, I'm grateful that what happened to me. But of course, it would be amazing if there's a way to avoid that for future generations, for other people. But I do fear that the systems that we live in right now, society isn't designed in a way to make us explore these things without any real reason, anything dramatic that happens to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing is really a system that we live within that is really designed for us to become compliant little citizens that feed the system.
Yeah, that perform and deliver an output, and then we're done. And a new generation will then take over and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely be great if we could change the system, particularly the education system, and say to kids, look, it's not about just getting good grades, and it's not just about getting a job and being a compliant employee. It's about, what do you want to do with your life? What makes you happy? What's your passion, right? But even saying that, I also think that regardless of that, you're always going to have challenges in life, and it's the challenges that you go through that actually make you stronger. Like you said, your challenges were a blessing, and that's absolutely right. And some of my biggest challenges in life have definitely been my biggest teachings. So it's like you go to the gym and you lift weights to get stronger. You have to go through that tough time to get the end result. So whilst we can definitely have a better way of living, I think regardless of how we live and what systems we have in place, you're always going to go through some kind of struggle, which is going to help you grow. That's kind of the way that I see the world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think the challenge is to see it at the time, though, because we can always see that in hindsight, the big events that taught us and that made us grow. But while we're going through, it's really hard to see that sometimes, especially when you feel like you're not making progress. It's really just kind of going backwards for a period of time, maybe sometimes years at a time, if you don't feel like you're able to turn it around and grow from that. But I totally agree. I think all the challenges in my life, if I look back, have been really moments where I had a choice to change my life for the better. And I'm very grateful that I did have these experiences and these learning opportunities, if you want, or teaching moments.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess what you're saying is, and I completely agree, is that, when kids are growing up, you can say, look, there'll be some hard times in your life. Life isn't just a bed of roses, until you, pass on. You're going to get bumps in the road, and that's okay. They're going to be tough. No, they're going to be tough, but also look for what that tough time is trying to teach you. That, I think, which is what I think you were saying, is probably the best way of doing that, because you can't avoid tough times, right?
No, you really can't.
It's how you respond to the tough times.
Yeah.
And I know it's a very old Eastern philosophy, but it's look for what that situation is trying to teach you, or what we call the pain teacher. What's the pain teacher trying to teach you?
Yeah, that's a really good term. I mean, I think it really applies to any type of hardship, really, as we're going through. If that's an attitude or a perspective that we can keep, to look for the teaching in that it's going to help us 100% to see things from a more supportive opportunities, from a more supportive perspective, and to really make the best out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I look back at my own challenges in life, and I've turned them into opportunities, because I've had specific injuries on my body. The worst one being I blew 2 discs out in my lumbar spine. But that is now one of the key niches of people that I help. I had severe acne. That's another niche that I help. I had eczema. That's another niche that I help. Gut issues, that's another niche that I help. So I've gone through those experiences, and I don't just have, the textbook information. I've lived it myself. And when you put those two things together, they're quite powerful. And also I'm able to empathize with those people now because I've been through it, so I know exactly how that feels.
Yeah, yeah.
So are you happy to share what your autoimmune conditions were that you had?
Yeah, so I have autoimmune hepatitis and Crohn's disease, and another more niche one that's a disease of the gallbladder. It's called PBC. So I don't know if that's a term people are familiar with. Primary biliary cirrhosis.
Interesting. And how did that? I mean, you kind of mentioned overall the symptoms that you had, but in terms of those specific conditions, like, did they have any other effects on you other than what you said previously?
I think the one that probably all of them had in common was that they were probably going on for a lot longer than I was aware. And at the time that I was diagnosed, it was really the tipping point where it was bad enough that I took it seriously. I think, so Crohn's was the last disease I was diagnosed with, but I'm pretty sure I had it probably for the longest. It just wasn't as bad to take it serious. And I think it's something that so many of us really might empathize with, because everyone really has digestive issues these days. I think most people that I talk to, they have digestive issues at one point or another. If it's really something like a nervous gut or something, when we have work stress, when we have any kind of pressure, when we have arguments at home, for many people that really affects how they are able to digest food. If they have a stomach pain or anything, if they have any kind of discomfort, and that might be first signs that there's something going on that shouldn't be going on there. And for me, that was really all my life. And it took about almost close to 30 years for me to be eventually diagnosed with this, when it was at a point where it was so bad that I couldn't ignore it any longer. But I think the biggest mistake that we often make is to take all of these discomforts and look at them as something that's normal, just because so many people have that. But it's not normal. I think the normal body is not in pain, is not in discomfort. So whatever the issue we have might be, it's something we should look at and investigate. Why are we feeling like this? And is there something maybe going on that causes these things? But yeah, I mean, going back to your question, I think the issue with autoimmune disease is your symptoms are so unspecific that it's really hard to pinpoint what's going on. So it's mostly fatigue, extreme fatigue, that you could sleep for days and you would still feel tired. That's probably the biggest one. Any kind of pains, like joint pains, nerve pains, just overall discomforts, low-grade fevers, things like that, hair falling out, anxiety, which kind of goes hand in hand with just being so worried about your health at that point. So for many people, then a doctor would say, oh, maybe you might be feeling like this because of anxiety. But I think anxiety is often the result of feeling like this for a long time. And yeah, it's a lot of things like this that are very, unspecific, unfortunately. And it's very difficult often to pinpoint where that comes from and what the driver is.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said that there's a lot of people that have some kind of gut issues at the moment. And again, when you look at what potentially can cause that, most people's diets are awful. About 95 to 99% of food sold in supermarkets is toxic. A lot of it's processed. But then the other thing that I know is big for you is that most people are massively stressed today.
Yeah.
Even before 2020, people were massively stressed, right? And that's just gone up tenfold since 2020 with all the propaganda and fear porn coming out of, politicians and journalists. Well, you can't really call them journalists, but from the media. So can you talk a little bit about the gut-brain connection? Julie, a 47-year-old who works in computer sales, came to see me complaining of lifelong irritable bowel syndrome, which included severe abdominal pain and bloating, loose and very frequent stools, along with hot flushes, menstrual brain fog, and low energy, which affected her work performance. After taking a comprehensive history, plus running some labs, I discovered that Julie had a parasite infection, which may have been causing the loose stools, a methane-producing bacterial overgrowth that was almost certainly causing the abdominal bloating and pain, a leaky gut, low levels of digestive enzymes, as well as eating too many high oxalate foods on her vegetarian diet. So Julie reduced the high oxalate foods from her diet, plus she took a broad-spectrum antimicrobial supplement to help with the parasites and the bacteria in her gut, probiotics to increase her good bacteria and help repair her gut lining. She also took prebiotics to help feed the commensal bacteria, digestive enzymes to improve her digestion, and herbs to help clear the toxic lipopolysaccharides from her system produced by the overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria. At the end of the program, Julie reported that her health had never been better. In her own words, the improvement is staggering. The abdominal pain and bloating was gone. Her stools were back to normal. Her energy was up. She no longer had brain fog or hot flashes, and her immune system had improved as she no longer suffered from frequent bugs and colds. If you're suffering like Julie was and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at bodycheck.co.uk. That's BODYCHEK. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Julie. Now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, so I think maybe we take a step back and look at the mind-body connection, because that's probably like an overarching term for really how we as human beings work. And it's very well researched now that there is a strong link between our mind and our body. So things that we feel, emotions, feelings, our thoughts, they have a really strong impact on our physical body, really, on any kind of symptoms that we have. But in the same way, if the way we treat our body, the food that we feed it, the amount of movement we get, the way we sleep, that also has a big impact on our mental health at the end of the day, and how we feel, how we think. And if we go down another level, more specifically, the gut-brain connection, it's kind of a sub-connection, if you want, under the mind-body connection that is really more specific to the gut or the digestive system, and the brain as the nervous system. And it's so interesting to me how strongly they are related, because if you look at them, you think two very distinct organs, the gut and the brain, they don't have much in common. But they're so intricately connected that it always blows my mind to really think about how deep that connection is. So things like if we have any kind of gut issues, really, any kind of digestive issues, if we have a microbiome imbalance, if we have a leaky gut, things like that, it's really proven now how much of an impact that can have on our mental health, how much of an impact it can have on our mindset, our emotions, things like really mental conditions. I think there's studies going on to treat things like autism with probiotics, for example, right? So there's a really strong connection between the two. And the most interesting thing really about our body is that all of these different systems that we have, for example, the digestive system, the nervous system in this case, they don't really operate on their own. They operate together with all the other systems in our body. So our nervous system, for example, has a really strong impact on our endocrine system. So all the hormones and whatever is going on in the body, the little messengers that we have in our body, which then communicates with the immune system. And if we have an immune condition, this is then where that link comes in, right? Because the way we treat our gut defines how our brain will feel, our nervous system will feel, will define how our endocrine system and our hormones look like, which will then define the health of our immune system, which again comes back to how the gut is looking and is feeling. So it's probably something that's the most underestimated in the conventional medical system. And as patients, if we never find out about it, it will never occur to us to treat gut conditions or real physical conditions with mindset practice, for example. But it's basically, it's probably as good, if not better, than changing our diet, which has an obvious direct impact on our gut health. If we instead simply start with a mindset practice, if we start with meditation, if we start with relaxation practice, stress management, things like that, might be just as important, if not more important.
Absolutely. I mean, more and more information is coming out about the vagus nerve, right? Which obviously is the nerve connection between the gut and the brain.
Yeah, exactly.
But then there's also a lot of research into the electromagnetic connection between the brain and the gut. So, if you look at the information coming out of the HeartMath Institute, you've actually got 3 brains. One's in your head, another one is your heart, and the other one is the gut, and they all communicate.
Yes.
Right, via electromagnetics. So it doesn't have to be, what we would call physical. Although if you want to go down that rabbit hole, nothing is physical in this reality. If you go into quantum physics, nothing is physical. It's all energy, just vibrating at different frequencies.
I think that's the biggest or the most difficult part. You can't see it, right? And I think in medicine, if you can't see it, it's not there. Like you have to have a strong marker in your blood or anywhere in your body for a doctor to agree that, yes, this is real, this is a condition. We can, on paper, we can be sure that this exists. And all of these things that you just mentioned, it's not something that we can see. It's energy fields, and it makes it extremely hard to deal with that in our conventional medical system that's simply not accommodating for these pieces of information.
Yeah, I mean, the sad thing about our medical establishments is that, and I think a lot more people are wise to this now after the last 4 years, but the medical industry is set up to make profits for large corporations. It's at the detriment of the patients. It's not there for the patients. It's there for the corporations to make huge amounts of money. That's just a fact. And, we've all been through a very tough time the last 4 years. But again, in a way, it's a blessing because a lot more people are now awake to the system that we've been living in for many, many years. And just like a goldfish doesn't know it's swimming in water, most people didn't know that they were living within this system. So, I have to look at that as a bit of a blessing. But you're right that, if you're only looking at what you can see or taste or feel or touch, you're a massive disadvantage because our 5 senses can only pick up on a tiny, tiny fraction of what is actually out there, right? I know people that can see chakras in people's bodies. They can see their meridians. They can see auras around people. Well, I can't see them, but I know people that can, right? So there's just so much more out there that a lot of people can't see. But I think what we're both pointing at is that in terms of health, it needs to be approached from a holistic point of view. You can't just look at it at one view. And in terms of things not existing if you can't see them or touch them, etc., the classic one is, do you only believe things if you can see them? And people will say, well, yeah. So, oh, great. Do you believe in love? And they say, yeah. Okay. Can you measure that? Right? So straight away, you've just disproven their theory that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Well, if you said to someone, do you love your spouse? Do you love your children? They go, well, of course I do. It's okay. Prove that. Show me on a test result. Right? So, we do have to look when it comes to health from physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. We need to look at every possible angle. Okay. And I know for you, the mental aspect, is very important when it comes to autoimmunity, right?
Yeah.
So just for the audience, what would you say are the most common gastrointestinal autoimmune conditions?
So there's two big ones. The irritable bowel diseases or inflammatory bowel diseases, which would be Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. I think that's the two most commonly known ones, and most the gut conditions, autoimmune gut conditions that most people would have.
And can you perhaps describe the difference between the two?
Yeah, so I think the main difference is that ulcerative colitis is usually something that is it happens in one very distinct area of the gut, and it's I'm not sure like the right words to describe it right now, but it kind of progresses from one area and spreads out from there, up or down, but it's contained to that one area in the gut. And Crohn's disease, on the other hand, is something that can really affect the whole digestive tract, from really your mouth through your esophagus, your stomach, your gut. It can affect everything in there, and it can also happen in many different areas in the whole digestive system at once. So you might have inflammation in your gut, specific areas there that you can also consider as ulcers. You could have them in your stomach, you could have them in your mouth, anywhere in there. So it's not to say that one is worse than the others. Both can be equally severe or also mild. But I think that's probably the biggest differentiator between the two.
Yeah. And we know that, we've mentioned diet is a crucial part of the process when it comes to gastrointestinal autoimmune disease. Can you explain, in your view, what optimal eating looks like, and also what are the risks when it comes to switching to a healthy, in inverted commas, diet?
Yeah, so I think really for those gut conditions, diet is such an obvious topic, because that's literally what you put into your mouth that goes right into that system, right? So the correlation between what you eat and how healthy your gut is enormous. And that probably also explains why that's where most people want to start if they want to feel better, if they want to improve their health. There's so many different diets out there, it's really overwhelming. So if you do start that search, if you go on Google, find out about the different diets, about what healthy eating really looks like, which foods are the healthiest foods to eat, every page that you will open will tell you something different. And that's something that I went through and I found extremely overwhelming. And especially when you're dealing with a chronic health condition, you already have no energy. Then you have to deal with that on top, finding out what the perfect diet is, how to do the whole diet change. It's overwhelming. And it's something that one of the biggest mistakes that I probably made, to start there when I have no capacity really to even deal with that, because it's a huge change and it has a big impact emotionally, what we eat. It has a big impact on simply like our whole lives, how we prepare food, when we eat, what we eat, all of these things. So it's not something I would often recommend people start. I would usually recommend they start with something that gives them a bit more energy off the bat, and that improves their mindset a bit, so they have the capacity again to deal with that. But when we then go to diet changes, and I mentioned before the overwhelming amount of different diet recommendations that are out there, what eventually made most sense for me after I really went through all the different things, I tried all the different diets from vegan to vegetarian, Mediterranean, anti-inflammatory, carnivore, like all the diets, right? And none of that really helped me. And I was at a point where I thought, like, why it doesn't make sense to me that there's that many diets out there. For every diet, you will find different scientific evidence that this is the best diet out there. And it didn't make sense to me. And eventually what did make sense to me was that the only reason why you could explain that every single diet that's out there, there's some scientific evidence for it, depending on the people that you observe, is that evolutionary, as human beings, we lived in different areas of the world and different kinds of foods were available to us. So of course, someone who lives in the desert or in an extremely hot country will have a completely different diet than someone who lives in a cold countries, like across, the North Pole or something, and in the Nordic countries. They must have, like, their bodies must be used to different kinds of food. So if you observe these two distinct cultures, they will have very different diets that are optimal for them. So we can't come in with one diet and say this is the best diet for every person on the planet. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make any biological sense. So what did make most sense for me eventually, what I then found out is a elimination diet, which is a diet that basically lets you eliminate for a specific period of time different kinds of foods to then eventually reintroduce them and see if you react to them. And one that makes most sense for people with autoimmune diseases is called the Autoimmune Protocol, or AIP. And that's a diet that has you eliminate food groups that are most critical for people with autoimmune diseases, and that are, for example, foods that are highly inflammatory that often lead to intolerances. For example, things like gluten, like dairy, processed foods, so things that are known to cause issues for a lot of people. And you eliminate those for 30 days at least, sometimes longer than that if you don't see big improvements. And the reason why I do that is because during that time, when you take out all the foods that your body might not tolerate, you give your gut the chance to heal and to recover. And once your gut is then in a better shape and able again to deal with more different foods, you can then reintroduce one by one the foods that you have eliminated previously, and you will then be able to notice which foods you don't tolerate. And that's how we can then spot exactly which foods we can eat, which foods we can't eat, which foods our body loves, which foods our body hates. And then we can design our own diet at the end of the day. And that is really the only thing that makes sense, because we're so different. Every human being is so different from any other human being on the planet. And we have to have our own diet. We have to have an individualized diet that also gives us the most nutrients possible. So just as important as eliminating a lot of foods is also reintroducing a lot of foods, or like introducing from the beginning a lot of foods that we might not have eaten, because someone who is eating a diet of mostly processed foods, if you then tell them, take out the processed foods, here are the foods that you can eat, every day they suddenly start eating chicken and broccoli. That's not very healthy either. So what we want for them is to have a diverse diet, even though it's restricted. So to include all the different foods that they are allowed to eat, include all the different vegetables, because all of them will give you different nutrients, include all of the different meats, fish, shellfish, whatever you have for protein, not just limit yourself to one source of protein. Don't limit yourself to apples, right? Eat like all the different fruits that are out there, and make sure you get as much variety as possible in your diet. And that is then how we also see people recover often quite fast. So there are studies that came out on the efficacy of the autoimmune protocol, specifically with people who had IBDs, so ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. There are really good results right now with that diet. So for me, it's always very important that this is also kind of something that's scientifically proven, scientifically valid, and not something that someone came up with and said, this sounds like a good idea, but we have really solid scientific results with that. And that is what I teach my clients. And that's how we can really often see very fast and very good results.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you speak because, in essence, that's how I've been working for the last 20 years in terms of nutrition, very much individualized nutrition. There's no one size fits all.
Yes.
Something that you said is really interesting in terms of the reason why individual diets make sense. And what you said was, we've evolved different parts of the world, different foods available, different weathers, etc.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how did you come to that conclusion?
It's really something that I never read about this anywhere, because to me, it's shocking that this isn't something that people speak about. It's just something that made sense for me at the time. When I was questioning how it's possible that there's so much scientific evidence for so many different diets, especially diets that are completely contradicting. How is that possible? But then when you look at the people that they tested these diets on, they are often very very local to a specific region on the planet. You will not have one diet that holds true across every single region of the planet. It just doesn't exist. And that's where, for me, kind of the alarm bells went off, because I thought, okay, maybe there is a link between these results, between the people that they tested their diets on and the diets that they recommend. And there must be a reason why people from different parts of the world have evolved to eat different foods, because that's simply what was available to them. For example, obviously people who come from Central Africa, they don't have access to the sea. They don't have access to fish. So they evolved to eat meats. They evolved to eat grains or whatever was local in that area. If you have someone who lives in a Nordic country at the sea, they barely have access to meats, right? They would mostly eat fish or whatever they found in the sea. Also, if the country is completely snowed in, you can't really have grains there. You don't have many vegetables or fruit there. You mostly eat fish. So that's where also the carnivore diet makes sense, because if that's the only thing that is available to you at the time, what else would you eat? And that's then what your body evolves to is getting used to. So that, yeah, it's really something that intuitively made sense for me. And how also I can explain that so many people have intolerances to different foods if they are not usually native to the countries or the regions where they grew up to. So there must be a reason why in Asia people are very lactose intolerant, or a lot more lactose intolerant than other areas of the world. Why is that? Nobody really questions why that is. We just know that it's the case. In different areas of the world, we have different intolerances that are more or less prominent. And evolution is really the only reason why that would be.
Well, it's interesting. I just wanted to get your view on how you came to that solution. And I have to say, your thinking is, it's very smart. And what might interest you to know, there's a book that was written in the 1930s called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And it's a thick book. It's one of the best books ever written on nutrition. And you've pretty much just described the book.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
I will look up that book.
So it was written by a dentist, American dentist called Weston A. Price. So he did his studies in the 20s and 30s. He traveled the entire world, and he was trying to model health. So he was going to all these native tribes and studying them, looking at what they ate. He was looking at their dentition. He was looking at their bone structure, their muscular system. He was, asking them about disease. Most diseases they didn't have a term for. These people are just eating natural diets. They didn't have toothbrushes. They didn't have dentists. They all had perfect teeth, right? And if there was any tribe nearby that had been affected by what he called white man's food, they had cavities in their teeth, they had gaps in their teeth didn't grow, their facial structure didn't grow properly, they had illnesses. It was just, it's an incredible book. There is an organization called the Weston A. Price Foundation, which again, there's tons and tons of stuff on this, but what you worked out for yourself, there's actually loads of evidence that's the truth. And what's interesting, I said for the last 20 years, I've been working on individualized nutrition. That is called metabolic typing. Right? There's a whole system that I've been using for the last 20 years. And the guy who is the kind of like the most world-renowned is called William Walcott or Bill Walcott. But he stands on the shoulders of other people, including Weston A. Price, and there's guys like Francis Marion Pottinger, George Watson, William Kelly. There's loads of people over the last century that developed the understanding of individualized nutrition and how it works. So, there's potentially a lot of research for you to do to understand why you actually, you already know it, but there's a lot of science behind it. So that's quite interesting. So in terms of when someone's changing their diet, what can be some of the risks involved when you're trying to change someone's diet or someone's trying to change their diet? When 35-year-old Amanda first scheduled to see me, she'd been suffering for 19 years from severe IBS, diarrhea and fecal incontinence, along with abdominal pain and bloating. Her condition had not only made life uncomfortable for Amanda, but very inconvenient as she had to walk 2 hours to work every day along a route that had public toilets, and she'd never been on holiday as an adult because of her condition. The only advice that several doctors and specialists had given Amanda was to take Imodium, and when she first saw me, she was taking 5 Imodium a day and wasn't getting any better. To help Amanda, I ran tests to find out what foods were right for her metabolic type, to see which foods she was sensitive to, and to assess her gut microbiome. Tests showed that Amanda had several food sensitivities and a parasite infection. Over the coming weeks, I coached Amanda to eat right of her type and to replace the foods she was sensitive to, and a protocol to deal with her parasite infection. And after 3 months, Amanda was IBS-free, and she also reported her skin was much improved and she had lost weight. And she booked a holiday for her and her husband to New York, as they'd never been on a proper honeymoon because of her IBS. And if you're suffering like Amanda was, and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at www.bodycheck.co.uk. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Amanda. Now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I feel like we don't talk about enough. So when I first started changing my diet, there's so many things that I really struggled with that I found so hard to get information about because people tend to keep looking on the positive side and the rosy side and best case scenario, this is going to help you and you're feeling so much better. But what happens if you try and change your diet and you feel worse? Like what problems could there be? And what I found is that, and many of my clients resonate with that, so there seems to be a bigger market to this, people tend to become obsessed really with diet changes and with eating healthy foods. And it makes sense because we start developing these food fears when we notice, oh, we have some intolerances here. We're not able to tolerate any food. We go down this rabbit hole of finding out which are the healthiest food, which are the unhealthiest foods, if you want, in quotation marks, because all foods are good, right? Like there's no food that like in nature. I'm not talking about processed foods or like foods being now created, but all the whole foods that are there are good. It's possible that some people don't tolerate them. And that's something that we tend to forget because we look at inflammation markers, we look at inflammatory foods, we look at insensitivities, and we start getting so scared of foods that it feels like there's no safe options out there anymore. There's many people with autoimmune diseases who really cut down their diet so much that they have 5 to 10 foods that still feel safe, that they kind of eat every day. And they're too scared to venture outside of that and try new foods again. And that's something that's extremely damaging, not only to your physical health, but also to your mental health, because food is a very, very important and very emotional act, really. And if we can't enjoy that anymore, there's a lot of quality of life that we lose with that. And another risk that I see over and over again that happened to me also is that because of all of these food fears, you really start with disordered eating. You don't eat like, again, in quotation marks, a normal person anymore. Your eating habits are so disordered and unhealthy that you just start harming yourself more and more. And when that started happening to me and I looked into that, I found out that there's a lot of research actually that links autoimmune diseases with eating disorders. And that's something that was shocking to me at the time, because I was dealing with both. No doctor had ever pointed out to me that there might be a link, how they are connected. And that really blew my mind. That changed so much for me, because becoming aware of how our eating habits really affect our autoimmune health, but also how our autoimmune health then affects our eating habits, if they're healthy or not, that changes everything. And if you are aware of that, and if you can kind of see the red flags when you start changing your diet, you're able to steer away from that, stay clear of that, and stay on the healthy side. But if nobody ever points that out to you, it's really difficult to spot when you're in the middle of it.
Mm. Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important as well when I'm coaching clients is if I'm suggesting someone eliminates something from the diet, that there is something to replace it with.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than saying, oh, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have this, you can't have that. You know, people say, well, then I can't eat anything. And it's an important part of the process to sit down with someone and say, well, look, okay, so what can we replace this with? It's not down to me, it's down to the client to choose. But obviously I might give them some options and say, well, instead of having this, you could perhaps have this or this or this. What do you think might work for you? Or you could have a mixture of all of those, but just have them at different times.
Yeah.
Just so that, people aren't thinking negative. It's like, okay, there's a negative, but here's the positive. You can't have this, but this, you should be fine on this. But again, you never know. Everyone's individual. You could introduce something as a replacement, and that's not good for them either, right? But that's the complexity of being a human being, right? There's so many facets involved.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I would also say that's potentially why, where possible, do get someone to help you, because, people like us, we've helped so many other people. A lot of the challenges that people have, we've seen them before. So we know the kind of, I don't like to use the term, but the quick fixes around some of the challenges that people have. And again, I always try to, rather than suggest this or that, is to suggest options to people and say, well, look, you could have this, you could have that, you could have this, you could have that. What do you want? Because the other thing that's important is that if the person decides to do something, they're far more likely to do it than if someone's suggested they do it. All right, we just know that from studying behavior change. So it's just really important to always give options rather than just take, and people are like, well, I'm left with nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest issue with the autoimmune protocol is we eliminate entire food groups. So it's sometimes very difficult to find replacements for foods that you've eaten all the time. So, for example, if you eliminate grains, they've become very, very hard to substitute one for one. You can't really do that, and you have to find options to really work around that, or also change simply the way you eat and the things that you eat, because we often get also very focused on one type of meal or one type of cooking, and we also have to open ourselves up to the possibility or the opportunity to start cooking completely different foods and be okay with that. And for example, I grew up in Germany. My parents, they eat bread every single day. It would be impossible to replace that for them. It's something you really have to think about before you jump into a diet change from one day to another and be like, okay, how can I substitute my dinner? If I don't eat bread, what options do I have here? And it's one of the reasons why diet change is never the thing where I start with my clients, because you have to be mentally ready for that and willing to make these changes, be okay with trying something completely new, trying to eat completely different dinners from before, trying to eat more, vegetables, meats. People who try and reduce meats, for example, it's going to be difficult for them to jump into the AIP because meat and fish is a very big component of that. You want to have like the best quality protein sources. And it's difficult if you try and reduce meat before that, because maybe you're thinking that that's the best thing to do, to eat more of a vegetarian based diet, and suddenly everything is then questioned and you have to really change everything. So there are big changes. Yeah, like you said, it makes sense to put in that time and think about how can I replace different foods, or potentially if I can't replace them, what other options do I have?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back in history, certainly in the Western world, we didn't even consider eating grains for breakfast until about 100 years ago, maybe a little more than 100 years ago, until, Mr. Kellogg came along and, saw a great opportunity to make a lot of money. And I think, what would my grandparents have eaten for breakfast? Bacon, sausages, eggs, liver, kidney, maybe tomato, maybe lots of butter or lard, right? That's what my ancestors would have eaten for breakfast until, the 1920s. And the fact that it's the norm now, people often say to me, I can eat fish or meat for breakfast. And it just seems so ludicrous to them, because we've become so conditioned to eat grains, whether it's, cereal with pasteurized milk or whether it's toast. But if you've got an autoimmune condition, those kind of things are probably not helping.
Yeah.
For a long period of time, probably since about 2000, I looked at my breakfast no differently to lunch and dinner. It's quite amazing when you step back and think about it, how we've just become so conditioned that breakfast is a time for cereals. When, you look at most people with white skin, for instance, we didn't evolve eating grains at all. My understanding is that, farming grains only started about 10,000 years ago around the region of Saudi Arabia. Well, in terms of our evolution, that's the top pin on the bit of the pin on the pinhead, right? It's just such a small amount of time that, quite often people do need to change their whole paradigm when it comes to food as well.
Yeah.
If they've got a condition that they want to overcome. But can you talk a little bit about perhaps obsessive health behaviors and how we can, or how people can make sure not to overshoot with their health efforts?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about obsessive eating habits, but I think the same applies really to all areas of lifestyle changes that we would make for foods. And we often see that when people try and get into a new exercise routine to improve their health, and suddenly all they do is try and exercise and they don't want to be stationary anymore. And it's too much of a good thing is also not good. And in many cases, it can be really detrimental to your health. And I think with all of these things, what we need to ask ourselves to stay on the right track and to avoid becoming obsessive is that still filling my cup? Because we're trying to do all of these things to fill our cup, to give us more energy, to give us more life, more health. And we notice when it doesn't become something that's supportive anymore. We notice when our body suddenly becomes more averse to it, doesn't really want to do that, resists. And when something starts to drain our cup. And that's really where we want to be very aware and question, is that still helpful to me? Is like if we stick with the diet example, for example, is that something that still feels good? And if it becomes something that's draining, where I put so much energy and so much effort into planning out my meals, and then I end up eating a meal that I don't enjoy, that's not filling your cup. And in no scenario is that going to be a positive change for you. And that's something that's sometimes really difficult to spot if you're on your own, and where if you have a practitioner on your side or a coach on your side, where that can be quite helpful, because you need to ask these questions and you need to be observant with the changes that you make. And if you do stay on that positive side and avoid slipping down into that obsessive habit where something that is actually good suddenly becomes something that is detrimental to your health.
Yeah, I think the key there is balance.
Yes.
As a Czech practitioner, one of the things that we say, well, there's 4 things. So I'll come back to the point I was going to make. So number 1, one is your one love. What's your dream? What do you want to achieve? Okay, what are you so passionate about achieving that you're willing to change for? The second one, which is the point I was going to make, is balancing your 2 forces, right? 3 is the 3 choices. So whenever you're making a choice, you've got an optimal choice, a suboptimal choice, and to be indifferent. So the optimal choice is going to help you achieve your goal. A suboptimal choice is going to prevent you from achieving your goal, but it may teach you something if you're ready to listen. To be indifferent just means you don't care, right? So you're not even going to learn from your mistakes. And then the 4 is what we call the 4 doctors. So Dr. Happy, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, and Dr. Movement. Okay, which I've gone into in previous episodes. So I won't go down that road now. But coming back to the 2 forces, the 2 forces are yin and yang. And whenever we're doing something, we've got to make sure that we get those in balance. So your yang energy is go, 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 right? But your yin energy is when you rest and recover. And the analogy I like to use with my clients is, imagine you've got a slice of bread, probably gluten-free, and you put it in a frying pan and turn the heat up full. That's yang, right? Heat is yang. If you just leave it in there and you leave it in there for too long, it's going to burn and eventually it's going to turn into ash. That's no longer a piece of bread, is it? It's no good to you. If you take another slice of bread and put it in a bowl of water, it's going to go soggy and it's just going to fall apart. It's still no good to you. So in this analogy, you want enough heat and enough water to stay in balance. So that original piece of slice of bread has the right balance. But if you give it too much heat or too much water, too much yang, too much yin, it's now no good to anybody. And that's what we need to do with our behaviours as well. Yes, we need to exercise, but we need to rest. Right? Yes, we need to eat good food, but we need to enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of just summing up your point, really.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like you said, you can really apply that to any area of life. And it's just important to keep in mind that even if it's a good thing, we can still overdo it with that. And it's important to find out where that balance is, where we do enough, but not too much to have it be something that's beneficial to us.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can definitely get too much of a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say are the 3 things that everybody can do to make their healing journey much easier to follow?
I think the most important thing is probably, and you mentioned that before in the 4 things earlier, you start with one thing. You can't focus on a million things at once. You have to really pick one and go for that one. And that's probably what most people get wrong, because they want to change everything at the same time. And then eventually it just gets out of hand. It gets overwhelming and you fall back and you're very disappointed and you have to start all over. So picking one thing, whatever that is, ideally picking a low-hanging fruit, something where you don't have to put in a crazy amount of effort, because if we are struggling with a health condition, we don't have so much energy to give. We want to start with something that gives us potentially a big outcome, but that's achievable, that seems realistic. That's a low-hanging fruit, simply. And that's also why I don't recommend starting with diet changes, because that's definitely not a low-hanging fruit. So something we learned earlier, the big connection we have between the gut and the brain, we can pick a mindset change, something like mindfulness, something like meditation, that can also help our gut, right? We don't have to start with diet. There's so many options that we have. We can pick something like going for a daily walk, and even if that's just 10 minutes, to simply give us a moment of mindfulness, to give us some fresh air, to give us exposure to nature, maybe, which is also been shown to be very positive, very relaxing for our body. This is something where we can start that feels much more achievable, much easier. But the important thing is to just pick one and stick with that one, not get distracted. I think secondly, I would say pick a goal. We have to set a goal. We can't just go in blindly and be like, oh, I'm going to try out that one thing and see where that leads me. That's also something that people really get wrong, because if we don't plan for something, if we don't have an outcome in mind and an intention for why we're changing something and why we're putting in that effort, if you don't have a goal, there's no like end line. There's nothing we can work towards, and we don't really have a focus on anything. And then it gets very frustrating, because if we don't have a goal, we also can't reach that goal. We never know when we're making progress. We can't measure it. So yeah, definitely pick a goal for your one thing. And the third thing would be get support. Like, nobody has to do it alone. There's so many qualified people out there who dedicate their lives to helping people in these difficult times. And that's probably the biggest mistake I did for the longest time, was to try and do it on my own. And I made so many mistakes and I wasted so much time that I could have spent feeling much better if I would have invested in some help earlier on, and go in with a proven system, go in with someone who knows what they're doing, where we don't have to stop and question everything along the way, where we're always unsure if we're doing the right thing, where we learn more information, we change out our whole course of action because we didn't really trust in our course of action to begin with. So yeah, getting support is definitely something that should not be underestimated.
Yeah, the other thing I would add to getting support, a lot of people say, oh, I can't afford it, right? But what often happens is, and this is certainly what I've seen, is that people go away and they spend money on, they buy a book and they do this and they do that, and they're buying products, and in the end they end up spending thousands and thousands of pounds or dollars or euros, and they haven't got any better.
Yeah.
Right. So you can actually save money by getting a coach, getting that support that you need, a coach that's been there, done it, hundreds of times before. So not only will you improve your quality of life sooner, which is probably the most important thing, but you can actually save yourself a lot of money by not making all the mistakes.
Yeah.
I'm sure you would admit yourself, or you did admit yourself, you've made loads of mistakes. I've made loads of mistakes, right? I had acne for 18 years. And my doctor didn't have a clue how to help me. He thought he did, but it was just getting worse and worse and worse. If someone comes to me with that condition, I know all the mistakes because I made them myself. Right? So I completely agree with what you're saying. Get a coach as soon as you can. Certainly take small steps forwards. So when I'm coaching someone, I don't ever give them more than 3 things to do in any session. Because what I don't want to do is overload someone's brain and make them feel stressed that they have to achieve all these different things before they see me again, right? Just 3 small things. Just keeping it really simple. And if you're working with someone that's making you feel overloaded, make sure you just make them aware of that. Just ask them, just slow down a little bit, just take the pressure off me. Okay. But if you've got a very good coach, they should already know that. Awesome. Great stuff. So what's next for you, Xenia?
Today or in life?
in life? You could say both, but in life generally.
To be honest, part of my healing journey was to stop really thinking about that and to just enjoy every day and take it as it is. And that changed so much for me because I was someone who always used to plan ahead and be like, where am I going to be next year? Where am I going to be in 5 years? How's my life going to look like? And I did that. And it turned out that everything that I had planned out for myself happened completely differently. I would have never thought I would be where I am today. So I learned that it's just not useful. And the opposite is actually true. It creates a whole lot of pressure that is completely unnecessary. So now I stop thinking about that. So I'm just going to enjoy that day to day. We have sunshine now, which in Germany, that time of year is very rare. So I'm just going to enjoy my day and see what happens.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because quite a few of my guests have come up with a very similar answer. It's just take each day as it comes.
Yeah.
Just
one of my biggest learnings, I think.
Yeah, just see what the universe is going to bring me and go with the flow. That's great. Xenia, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to hear this and they're going to really benefit from hearing what you've said today. So thanks very much.
Of course. And thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. So that's all from Xenia and me for this week. But don't forget, you can join me same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.